Welcome everyone to the podcast. And before we get started on today's episode, I'm introducing you to my workshop season of empowerment. It's called the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Series, and it's a series of summer workshops to help activate your ADHD life, improve your wellbeing, and harness your potential. So I would love for you to join me on these empowering workshops, all individually accessible, and you can buy one all-access pass for all 7 of them. And they are designed to help guide you from self-doubt to self-acceptance, from overwhelm to ease, and from burnout to balance. So whether you're newly diagnosed with ADHD and or autism, you may be awaiting an assessment or just curious about your own neurodivergence, these workshops will guide and empower you to advocate for both yourself and your loved ones and help you access more self-acceptance and welcome in self-compassion for all that you haven't known and didn't understand. And that is what I want to bring with these workshops. So let this be your awakening and your activation to better times ahead. Like me, and probably you, after decades of navigating life without guidance or validation, I believe it's time for us to understand and embrace all the emotional and the physical impacts ADHD has on us. And with these expert insights, the psychoeducation, and this compassionate support through the workshops, I want to help you find your true self and really blossom with confidence and self-compassion and joy. So all the information is on my website. It's adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk. You'll see all the dates. They start from the 18th of March. That's the first one. And it's how to rest and recharge your ADHD nervous system, brain, and body. It goes all the way through to the 24th of June. And like I said, if you buy this all access pass for 7 of the workshops, you'll get the bonus session on the 8th of July, which is a Ask Me Anything Q&A, really there to answer as much as I can within reason. And I really hope that you will join me. So like I said, head to my website. It's adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk and you'll find all the information on the workshop topics and the dates. They're all going to be 1:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, UK time, and there will be recording. So even if you buy the all access pass and you want to watch them in your own time, that's fine. But if you watch them live, you will get access to being able to interact with others, but also myself on the question chat box. And I will be able to answer some of your questions towards the end of the workshops. And now on to today's episode. Welcome to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Kate Moore-Youssef, and I'm a wellbeing and lifestyle coach, EFT practitioner, mum to 4 kids, and passionate about helping more women to understand and accept their amazing ADHD brains. After speaking to many women just like me and probably you, I know there is a need for more health and lifestyle support for women newly diagnosed with ADHD. In these conversations, you'll learn from insightful guests, hear new findings, and discover powerful perspectives and lifestyle tools to enable you to live your most fulfilled, calm, and purposeful life wherever you are on your ADHD journey. Here's today's episode. I'm here today with an amazing ADHD coach, creator, and writer. Her name is Meredith Carter, and Meredith holds a BS in psychology and MBA. And as a true multi-passionate adult with ADHD, Meredith has gained varied experience over the last 20 years working in employee training and development, as well as tackling several small businesses. Meredith prides herself in her ability to hold a supportive space for her clients and facilitate lasting connections in her community for ADHD adults. Hummingbird Live, and I know you've got a fantastic Instagram account as well called Hummingbird ADHD. Her recent book is called It All Makes Sense Now and seeks to both validate the challenges that exist with ADHD and provide empowering strategies for personal growth. I have the book and it does exactly that. It's called It All Makes Sense Now, Embrace Your ADHD Brain to Live a Creative and Colourful Life. So thank you so much, Meredith, for joining me. I'm so excited to talk to you. We've got a great conversation coming up. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So you have written this fantastic book, and I'm so impressed because it kind of tackles lots of really interesting topics and concepts and really delves into the many kind of unique ways that ADHD shows up. But I'd love to just find out a little bit about your personal story. When did you realize that you had ADHD, and I guess how did it manifest for you?
Well, I realized I had ADHD very shortly after my daughter's ADHD diagnosis. Actually, probably the signs were showing up during that process. Filling out that diagnostic paperwork and doing the interviews, all of a sudden I was realizing a lot of the things she was struggling with were things that I had struggled with my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a very wide lens of what ADHD looked like at the time, so I did have to dig a little deeper to understand how some of those symptoms that show up for children, like hyperactivity, show up differently in girls and women, and how they were continuing to impact me. So I really had dived into a lot of reading and learning after she was diagnosed. And that's when I started to really realize that it was me too.
Yeah, I think so many people, especially myself, can relate to all of that. How long ago was that?
Gosh, time is hard. It was before the pandemic. I want to say 2018 ish was when I started to self identify as ADHD. And then I got my official diagnosis around 2020, 2021. I definitely stayed in that exploration phase for a while. I asked
Mm.
myself a lot of questions like, is it even worth getting diagnosed? But I did decide to, pursue that official diagnosis a few years later.
And then from what I'm gathering, you kind of pivoted what you were doing career wise and yeah, I guess used all your experience in, I guess, how you were presenting in your career and then started helping people with ADHD. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually had taken my first class in the coaching program I ended up completing really just to understand ADHD better. I was having a really hard time connecting to a lot of books that were out there at the time. This was before Instagram had really, taken off.
Mm.
This was pre-pandemic, and I found a intro to ADHD course through a coaching program that you can take kind of like standalone as a prerequisite. And I took that. And that is when I really realized that ADHD coaching was even a thing. I hadn't even heard of it. And through that program, I started working with coaches on my own and saw the power in that modality and realized I had a lot of transferable skills in what I was doing in the corporate world. So it made a lot of sense to move into something that I felt could really help a lot of people.
Amazing. And what you've created with your community and what you've done on your Instagram platform is incredible. And I can see how connected people are to how you talk about ADHD. And I guess how validating so many, the conversations that you're having online are, but also the tools and the strategies to help. And I can see this is now sort of naturally progressed into the book. How did you find, writing the book? And I guess how long did it take you?
Oh gosh, it is a long and complicated story. But when I received my contract with my book, and one of the first questions my editor asked me was, "How long do you want to write the book?" And I said, 3 months. And she thought that was absurd because typically people take 6 to 8 months after signing a contract. But I knew with my ADHD brain that I needed a deadline. And if they told me 6 months, it would probably take me 3 months to get started. But yeah, I wrote it in about 3 months. That doesn't include all of the editing and all of the passes through that you do later on, and for context, I had a whole outline, a whole proposal already written. So I wasn't starting completely from scratch, but yeah, that part went pretty quickly. I enjoyed it so much, but it was also so hard at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're maybe highlighting is how our brains work so well under pressure and under deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of almost like adrenaline, cortisol fueled way, because I think you probably knew yourself better than the editors did, that you were like, if you give me 6 months, I'm going to do it in 3 months anyway. So I might as well do what I can do in those 3 months. And I get asked a lot, by a lot of people like, oh my God, I'd love to write a book, but I'm worried about my ADHD. I'm worried that it's going to block me. I'm going to self-sabotage. I'm not going to be able to transfer what I know is in my brain onto paper. And I wondered if you had those moments where it did feel really difficult because of your ADHD.
Yeah, there were definitely days when the words just flew out of my brain and it felt really easy and I really enjoyed the creative process. But then there were days where I felt like I had an outline, I had a topic I was going to talk about in a chapter, and all of a sudden I was like, I feel like I know nothing about this. And I knew I knew things, but yes, sometimes our ADHD really can feel paralyzing.
Yeah.
I usually in those moments I gave myself a word count goal for each writing session. It wasn't a lot of words, but it was a doable amount. So I told myself, just get to that word count. You're going to go back over it later. And oftentimes that gave me enough to work with that when I could revisit it on a day that I felt a little more clear, it would come together a little bit better and I could revise it. I also at times would, instead of just typing things out, voice note my thoughts and have that translated. And, there's a lot of cleanup involved when you do it that way, but it did help on those times when I was feeling like it just wasn't coming out in the written word. So I definitely feel like if people have that desire to write, there's a lot of ways we can do that now. And there's a lot of ways we can accommodate our ADHD brain to make it possible.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful for people to hear, that it doesn't have to look in this sort of very traditional way of just kind of like churning out, words. And I do that a lot, actually. I use like a voice transcription. And yes, there is a bit of clearing up and you have to kind of, go over it, but at least the contents of my brain are down, and I can then, so I actually find that I'm sometimes more inspired because I use that as the foundations, and then I can type more using that base. But it's just like, it's like getting started, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes it was easier to do it that way. It was almost like a verbal processing was happening as I used that modality. So yeah, I think the important part is before starting these types of projects, it's really important to understand how you work best and understand your brain and embrace the fact that your process is going to look different than a neurotypical person's process might.
Yeah, I would say it's a really great book for someone who just wants to kind of have validation and more understanding of how their ADHD shows up and the different traits. Something that I wanted to talk about today, which we kind of discussed before, that we think was a really interesting conversation. That's something I see a lot in myself, in my community. I hear from people that listen to the podcast, is that how their ADHD shows up is overcompensating, being overproductive, overworking, which leads to burnout, and being this person that maybe has been fueled by perfectionism, and someone who has known that there's something that's going on, or maybe they have had lots of criticism in the past, and that has then given this impetus to constantly over deliver. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about this. Do you think this is a female trait, or do you think this is just a sort of a blanket ADHD trait? And how do you see this showing up in day-to-day life?
I don't think it's just women that show up with that tendency. I think there's a lot of things that play into that tendency to over deliver, to overcompensate, to overwork. But I do think we are socialized as women to mask more than men, maybe. I think oftentimes we learn that early on. We are, like you said, getting into that perfectionism as a coping mechanism at higher rates.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it can show up for anyone with ADHD. I think that the masking comes into play, but I also think there's other things because of our ADHD symptoms that contribute, like our tendency to be really interested in something. So we start a new job and we're excited about it. It's new, it's novel. So we're working really hard. And then we've come to have this reputation as someone that produces these incredible outcomes. So we may be able to sustain that for a time, and then that can't last forever, right? So we have this reputation and we feel that we have to continue to be that person that showed up with so much productivity. And even in our own lives, we notice those cycles, right? So we one day might be able to work an 8-hour day, clean out a closet, go to all of our kids' activities, and we feel like Superwoman or Superman. And then the next day, we have to recover from that. I feel that people with ADHD have bigger swings in their productivity naturally. And so what can happen is when we have those productive days, we're expecting ourselves to operate that every single day after that because we know we can do it. So we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to push through when we are exhausted and in need of recovery. And I think that also contributes to that overworking and over-delivering.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so relatable, isn't it? Of like seeing that, but knowing it's not sustainable. And like you say, when you say we've got these swings, it's like it's our energy, because sometimes we don't even understand that one day we just wake up and we're just full of energy. We feel like we can conquer the world. And literally 24 hours later, it's gone. It's totally gone. The motivation's gone. The interest is gone. Can you speak a little bit about that? Like, what is that because of?
I think that hyperfocus comes into play there. If we've had a day and we're very hyper-focused on something, oftentimes when we're hyper-focused, we are not drinking enough water. We're not eating enough. We are pushing ourselves and kind of ignoring some of our biological needs a little bit. And our brain also just has like a huge metabolic demand. So when we are zoned in on something, when we are using our brain at the level we're using it when we're hyper focused, or even when we're using our body to get through a lot of things because we have a lot of energy, it's natural to need some recovery from that. So I do think it's that physical energy is different typically after periods of being hyper focused. And then if we have struggled to eat or drink, that's just compounding that as well. I also notice that on days when I've been really, really hyper focused on something, that my sleep often gets impacted. So it's harder to turn our brain off when we've had those really active days. So we may suffer the next day because we didn't get great sleep as well.
Yeah, it's like we operate in these extremes, isn't it? And then because we may have gone through life of not understanding this, and then there was like shame and judgment. So there's a lot more energy to then go into either trying to understand it or mask it or analyze it. Everything is involved around the energy. And like you say, if we've been doing this and we then have this extreme of, I need to just numb out, so if we've gone from like hyper focus for 10 hours that day, we've done everything, we've been overproductive, we then shame ourselves for then not being able to have a conversation, for just literally kind of being in this kind of meltdown zone of numbing out, not being able to eat, talk, move, shower. And I genuinely think that when we have this awareness and this understanding, we can be more intentional. We're trying to bring in more moderation. And exactly what you say, whether it's biological, whether it's we have to be more intentional about, like, let's drink some water, let's take a break because we need to eat, or we need to stretch our legs or get some fresh air. But when we don't have the awareness, it's really hard to put these practices into place because we think there's like a fundamental kind of personality flaw or something, broken within us. But I think that if we are able to give ourselves that self-compassion and say, okay, now I understand my brain, I understand how my ADHD shows up, why I want to hyper-focus, why I'm overproducing, why I'm overworking, we can break it all down and slow down that ripple effect of everything almost descending into chaos and put those buffers in place. This is how I've definitely helped myself and then helped other people. Just creating those moments of awareness, take a breather, notice, and then what have we got in our disposal? Like, what buffer can I put in place to prevent it almost like spiraling out of control? Again, it's hard, isn't it? When we've got ADHD and we have passion and we have enthusiasm and we have excitement, especially when it's novelty and it's new and it's something that's really lighting us up. Do you find now that you've been working with ADHD for so long, you're so entrenched in it, you've just written this book, do you still get derailed by your own ADHD?
Oh, of course. Yes, absolutely. I would say I don't get my train doesn't go quite as far off the tracks anymore, but it definitely, there are days where it's very, very hard still. I feel like ADHD evolves with time, and whatever life phase you're in, you almost have to recalibrate and switch up your strategies and evaluate. But my symptoms are absolutely still there. I definitely have not, conquered life with ADHD, but I will say I'm living my life completely differently than I was before I was diagnosed. A lot of what you just talked to around understanding my patterns and getting rid of that feeling of shame when I'm having a low day. It's kind of both, right? It's taking the steps to prevent those low days from being so low, and it's taking the steps to build self-compassion so that when I am having a day where I need more recovery, I'm not also having a script running through my brain about, how I messed up and how I put myself in this position again and I should know better, and all of those things that we could say to ourselves that make that low day feel even worse, and I think harder to recover from. I have gotten better at truly being able to rest, to know my patterns, to recognize when hyper focus is a good thing and when it's starting to derail me a little bit. And I've put a lot in place to help with that. So the symptoms are there, but I look at them differently and I accommodate myself better now than I ever did before.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned rest, and I know that many of us really struggle with rest. And we've had this very stereotypical way of what rest should look like, and that is lying on a bed and trying to go to sleep. And when we have got these brains that don't stop moving and going, and we go from a very hyper-focused, extreme, stimulating place, we can't just then go and lie down on a bed for 20 minutes and try and close your eyes and rest. That just doesn't work for most of us. Some people can. Some people can literally just crash and fall asleep. What does your rest look like? And I guess maybe we can talk a little bit as to what can ADHD rest look like when we have been in that place of overproductivity and overworking and over delivering.
Yeah, I think rest really does need to be redefined for us. And I think it's different. We might need different types of rest depending on where we're at. We might need that physical rest in our body. We might just be needing more sleep. And that's really important to honor when we can. But I also think we need mental rest. Sometimes we need to disengage from work, from the pressures of life. Sometimes I think we need more active rest. Like we need to be out in nature, walking or hiking or something like that. That's my favorite way to unwind on a weekend, is doing something that's active in nature. That's when I feel like my mind actually calms down.
Yeah.
And then we also need, some of our rest time needs to be dedicated to learning and growth, especially if our job does not provide that for us. So if we have a day-to-day that feels a little bit more mundane, that our job is kind of the same every day, and it's bringing home a paycheck, it's providing for us, but it's not really lighting our brain up, then some of our rest should be learning something that's interesting to us, to kind of give us that dopamine to have the motivation to do the rest of the things. So we really do have to get to know ourselves and know what we find re-energizing versus just defaulting to that narrow view of rest.
Yeah, I love that. I like to be able to give these suggestions because when people, if they're just saying, well, I've been told that rest is you have to lie down and you shouldn't be moving and you should have your eyes closed, and rest, is sleeping. But I agree with you. I'm the same. If someone said that to me, I would make me more anxious, and I probably would not be any more rested than I would be if I was running around the house. But if I go for a walk with my dog and I get outside, I can breathe, get rid of all the computer and the tech and everything, I feel much more re-energized and rested as well. And emotionally, I'm calmer. My body's calmer. Everything is calmer. And we're not told this. And I think it's really important that when we're neurodivergent, we can reframe these very sort of neurotypical ways that we've been told to do life. So if we are wanting to, like you say, to learn and to grow, many of us find that learning with ADHD is like, it feeds our curiosity, it feeds our creativity. But someone else would say, oh my God, the thought of, sitting and reading books and doing a course is just totally the opposite. But I agree, like if I can learn something different that is not my day job, I feel more fulfilled and I feel content, and it probably feeds into my emotional well-being. So it's trusting ourselves, isn't it? It's trusting that even though we've been told one way to do life and to show up, and that's what life should look like, it's okay for us to challenge, and it's okay for us to query and to lean into what works for us. And I think many of us have gone through life kind of intuitively knowing what is good for us, what does work for us. But society and our conditioning and old beliefs and all of that have kind of like dampened it out. And that in itself is exhausting, isn't it? Because not trust yourself this whole time, to constantly be like, well, I feel this, but then someone's telling me that. And then we don't have this, we don't know. We don't know what's right. We don't know what's wrong. And that's what I love about these late in life diagnoses, because it's this validation of actually, maybe I did know better. Maybe I did, if I had listened to myself, if I hadn't, gone down the route of whatever that was, like say university or college or the degree, and I actually did the thing that I really wanted to do, maybe, life would have turned out differently. Whatever that might be, we can't change the past, but we can start putting things in place now for the present and for the future, where we can lean more into what feels good to us and hopefully change the path and the journey for others behind us.
Yeah.
Are you finding that a lot with, I guess, the people that you're working with, the people who are being diagnosed later on in life, who are just getting these understandings? Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're experiencing in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that self-trust that you spoke about is so, so critical. Oftentimes, I think people realize they have ADHD and they're looking for the life hacks, right?
Yeah.
They want to hear what are these little tiny changes. And I love that life hacks. I mean, visual timers, like that, those changed my life. They can be really, really helpful for us. But when I'm working with clients, I really do stress that getting to know yourself, understanding your brain, and then allowing yourself to do the things you know are right for you, to operate differently, and building the confidence and the trust that you can do things differently. Because self-trust is actually the number one thing I think people that are diagnosed later in life, or maybe they weren't given a lot of psychoeducation about ADHD when they were diagnosed, rebuilding the self-trust is really, really important, because we've been reading all the things. Most of us have been trying very, very hard to figure out how to exist as a neurotypical person our whole lives. We are usually people that have consumed a ton of self-help. We've tried a lot of things. It's not for lack of trying. So it's easy to see how our confidence gets eroded over time. And we have to rebuild that and be able to start there before any of those hacks are going to help us. And it's really, really important to spend the time on that piece if you want those lifelong changes, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's so crucial for people to know, because I agree with you. Those hacks are great, those little tips, those reframes, there's certain things that just make life easier. But unless we are coming from like deeply intrinsically within us, where we can say, actually, I don't want to do life like that anymore. Like that's not working for me. And you can look back and there's evidence there of burnout, health issues, gut issues, autoimmune problems, mental health conditions that potentially, yes, we do know now that ADHD is the root of many really debilitating, health crises. But I wonder if we are able to remove that shame and the self-criticism, and we can start replacing that with more of the self-forgiveness and the self-compassion, that when we make life easier for us and we remove that judgment, so many things start falling into place a little bit more. Especially if maybe let's talk about careers. If we've struggled in our career and we've struggled to find a place that we feel fulfilled, or we feel that we're kind of like hitting our purpose or our potential or whatever that is. I would say potential. And then we get the ADHD diagnosis and we can say, actually, this is why working in an office environment hasn't worked for me. This is why I come home and every night I have a migraine because of the artificial lighting, or I can't get outside. And when we make those changes and we lean into, actually, I work much better on my own at home, or I work better when I'm outside, and then we see ourselves kind of almost blossom and bloom. And I would say my biggest hope that with all this awareness and everything that you do and I do is that we're getting diagnoses earlier on. We're getting more people standing in like self-empowerment and knowing how to advocate for themselves, ask for what they need, no longer feeling that they can't ask for certain accommodations or they shouldn't work according to how their brain wants to work. All these different things that we don't see this anymore. We see people living up to their amazing potential. Nothing upsets me more when I know I'm in front of someone who is clearly incredibly gifted and intelligent and passionate, but because of the box that they found themselves in through lots of different variables, that they have kind of not had a very fulfilling life. It really upsets me. So yeah, I think this is just, I would love to say that I hope that we're on this journey of recovery. And yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but I just thought, I wonder what you're seeing when you see someone that comes to you later on in life and there's a lot of pain and a lot of sadness and there's a lot of grief, that I hope that we're the last generation that experiences that.
Yeah, I really hope we are too. And I think that, maybe not the very last, because I still talk to parents and still hear a lot of things like, I don't really think I need to get them diagnosed. They're doing fine. And they really are not. Like you said, they can fit into the box. They can force themselves into the box, but they're not comfortable in that box, and they're not comfortable in their box in the school environment. And they probably won't be if they choose the wrong environment for their career and their vocation. So I think that we are getting so much closer. I have seen the difference in my own child with the shifts we made in parenting and our philosophy. And she is doing amazing. Like, she is the kid that coaches love. She's doing great. And her path might not look like the path that other parents might want their kids, to follow. She's got a lot of different interests. She may or may not go to a 4-year college. I think she could if she wants to, but she also has a lot of entrepreneurial skills and desires, and we're supporting that. And I think that when we understand what our brains need, the environments that we operate best in, when we can help our kids explore that and help these younger people that are diagnosed earlier see that from the very beginning, then there's a whole lot of confidence that is built that they are capable. If we are diagnosed later in life and we've spent 30 years in a career that we one day realize, wow, maybe it could have been different somewhere else, then there's a lot of grief that we have to sort through as well. And that doesn't mean that we can't move forward in a different way and have the rest of our life be wonderful and fulfilling, but we can't take away those feelings sometimes of, wow, it could have been different. So when we start younger with that exploration and understanding, I do think more young people will find themselves in the right environment, or not find themselves. It won't be an accident. They will put themselves in the right environment because they'll understand what they need better. And I think that that's why early diagnosis and information and advocacy is so important, because we need to help the people like you and me that were diagnosed later in life unwind a lot of that and move forward in a different way. But we also need to educate all of these parents and teachers and people that are supporting these young people with a diagnosis, because I work with a lot of clients that were diagnosed younger. And a lot of times their experience isn't that different than ours. They may have been told they had ADHD, maybe given medication, maybe not, and continued to struggle, weren't really told what it really meant for them. It was kind of looked at it through a very narrow lens, and they still find themselves as adults not really understanding what ADHD means for them. So I do think that the information that is growing and like you said, the work that we're doing is making an impact. I do have high hopes for the future and for the next upcoming generations.
Yeah. And I think what's really great is that a lot of people who are being diagnosed with ADHD are then wanting to advocate wherever they work. We're seeing this huge surge in people wanting to train in ADHD coaching as well, which I think is amazing because, how wonderful would it be if there was an ADHD coach in every single school? Here we have SEND departments, special education needs departments. Some of them are great, some of them aren't that great. But if we could have these departments where we're understanding neurodiversity so much better and how it shows up and how dyslexia and ADHD often go hand in hand. And there's just this understanding. And like you say, the people who've been diagnosed early on in life, maybe 20 years ago, they didn't then have the coaching and the support and the cheerleading and the hand-holding to get them to that potential. They just kind of were like, here's your diagnosis, here's some medication, good luck. Whereas now we know how powerful coaching can be. And I love that one of our traits with ADHD is definitely to make a difference. We want to help. We're empaths. I think it's a big, strong part of us is to advocate for people who maybe haven't got a stronger voice. And so I think that this surge in people training to be ADHD coaches, we can adopt them around wherever they are in different careers and schools and universities. We've got this net of holding people and supporting them when they really do need it, because as great as a diagnosis is and great medication, medication can be so helpful. But I think if we haven't got the coaching alongside, it's really hard to still navigate life with ADHD. And podcasts like mine and all your Instagram posts and everything are fantastic. But I think to have someone who just really gets it and really understands the nuances of ADHD and then can give guidance and support and help and motivation, like helping them find that inner motivation to succeed is very powerful. Do you train other coaches? Like what's your service? And people might be listening now and kind of go, how could I work with you? What services do you have available?
I do a few things. I do mentor solopreneurs. A lot of those people are training to be coaches, not always ADHD coaches, but sometimes people that are trying to figure out, okay, well, I have this new skill set, but I really don't know how to work day to day on my own as an ADHDer. So I work with those types of clients one-on-one. I also have a community. It's called the Hummingbird Hive, and that's open to anyone. And we do weekly kind of planning meetings where we get together, everybody kind of does their planning process. We share intentions. We just add a little more intentionality to our everyday lives together as a group. And then there's also an educational component about that and Q&As and things like that as well. I love that offer because it's accessible in a way it's a little bit lower priced than one-on-one coaching would be. I love one-on-one coaching. I do think people make just so much progress in that format, but I only have so much capacity to coach. Like you said, there's a lot of people training to be coaches right now, but I still think we have a huge need for more people in this field. So being able to have an offer that accommodates more people is really important to me. So those are my two main areas of focus currently. I occasionally, because I have ADHD, I like to do a lot of different things in my business. And I don't fight that anymore. I don't just narrow down and put myself in a spot where I'm only offering one thing. So occasionally I will do a group program with different focus areas on different topics. So those are things that kind of come up as I'm inspired to teach them.
Yeah, I love that. I'm the same in the sense that I can go for months and months and not do a workshop or not put any offers out there. And then I kind of criticizing myself for that because my energy is going somewhere else on a different project or something going on in my life. And then when I get that energy back to do more offers, I go with that flow now. I kind of work with the ebbs and the flows and the cycles and not push myself to show up the same way every single month, because I know that's when I start resenting things and it becomes something that I dread. So it's just another example, isn't it, of if we can work with the flow of our energy and our ADHD. And like you said earlier, when we are, it shows up differently throughout our life, and especially as women with our hormones and all of that. That's a whole other conversation, but we have to be aware of this and not fight it, because the fighting takes so much energy. And when we now have the awareness of ADHD, we can almost just like drop the weapons and just surrender a little bit more, but also with awareness as well, compassionate awareness. So I love this conversation, and I love what you're doing, and I really recommend the book. I will put all the details in the show notes. The book is called It All Makes Sense Now, which clearly it does for so many of us. And I just want to thank you for all your insights and your work in this community, Meredith. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well.
I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did and it resonated with you, I would absolutely love it if you could share on your platforms, or maybe leave a review and a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please do check out my website, adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk, for lots of free resources and paid for workshops. I'm uploading new things all the time, and I would absolutely love to see you there. Take care, and see you for the next episode.